You felt the shift, you felt the pressure, you felt the sudden heat rise around your life for no clear reason. Listen carefully. You are not imagining it. You are not being dramatic. You are not unlucky. You are marked. There is something on you that irritates darkness. There is something in you that disturbs comfort. And the attacks you have endured were never random. Have you ever noticed how opposition seems to come in waves? How just when you are growing, resistance appears. How just when you are stepping forward, someone tries to diminish you? That is not coincidence. That is confirmation. You are not ordinary. You never have been. Ordinary people do not trigger strategic warfare. Ordinary people are ignored. But you provoke reaction. And that reaction is evidence. There are 9 atomic spiritual fires that ignite when people oppose you. 9 divine flares that activate not despite resistance, but because of it. This is not about revenge. This is about revelation. This is about understanding what the enemy accidentally triggers when they try to suppress you. Not everyone will understand this message. Only the chosen recognize this pattern. If you feel this resonating already, then you already know. Stay with me. Lean in. And if this message confirms what your spirit has been sensing, connect with this channel. Stand with this frequency, because what is happening to you is not common. It is prophetic. First, the fire of exposure. You remember the moment, the criticism, the betrayal, the sudden hostility that felt disproportionate. You asked yourself, why such intensity? Why such effort to silence you? Why such coordinated resistance? Here is the revelation. Opposition is never random. It targets voltage. It targets potential. It targets calling. Darkness does not waste energy on what carries no threat. So when the attack came, it was not about your weakness. It was about your weight. There is something heaven placed inside you that others can sense before you do. They may not have language for it, but they feel it. And when people feel what they cannot control, they react. Psychologically, rejection cuts deep. It makes you question yourself. It makes you shrink. It makes you wonder if you are too much, too intense, too different. But spiritually, it reveals rank. It exposes assignment. The hostility you experienced was a spotlight. They tried to diminish you. They tried to downplay you. They tried to reduce your impact. But listen, if you were insignificant, they would have ignored you. If you were powerless, they would not have mobilized. Their attack was exposure. Exposure of your anointing. Exposure of your growth. Exposure of your divine voltage. You were not being punished. You were being identified. This is why the heat felt personal. Because it was targeted. You were targeted. Not because you are weak, because you are marked. And once you understand this, something shifts. You stop internalizing the attack. You start interpreting it. You stop asking what is wrong with me, and you start declaring what is on me. Stand firm. Do not shrink. Do not apologize for the fire you carry. The very resistance that tried to bury you revealed you. And this is only the first ignition. Second, the fire of separation. You felt the distance. Friends grew quiet. Rooms felt colder. Invitations slowed down. Conversations shifted when you entered. You told yourself it was coincidence. You tried to adjust. You tried to blend. But the gap kept widening. Have you noticed that the more aware you become, the fewer people can walk beside you? That is not rejection. That is refinement. Warfare forces separation. Light cannot fully merge with darkness. Calling cannot fully rest in comfort. When the enemy cannot silence you, it isolates you. Not to destroy you, to develop you. Conflict creates distance between you and the comfortable crowd. And that distance hurts. It feels like loss. It feels like abandonment. It feels unfair. You wonder, why can't I just belong? But listen carefully. Belonging was never your assignment. Becoming was. The world bonds over distraction. The chosen bond over destiny. And destiny requires solitude. Isolation sharpens you. When the noise fades, your discernment awakens. When the crowd disappears, your hearing becomes precise. You begin to sense motives. You begin to detect shifts in atmosphere. You begin to recognize spiritual warfare before it manifests. That does not happen in comfort. That happens in separation. You were not removed because you failed. You were removed because you were advancing. Darkness cannot shape you, only pressure can, and pressure requires space. Have you ever realized that your greatest growth came in seasons where no one understood you, where explanations failed, where you sat alone wrestling with questions? That was not punishment. That was preparation. Heaven will separate you before it elevates you, because elevation without discernment is dangerous. You are not being excluded. You are being trained. Trained to stand without applause, trained to hear without confirmation, trained to move without permission. The comfortable crowd could not go where you are going. They prefer stability. You carry destiny. They prefer agreement. You carry assignment. And when warfare erupted around you, it served a hidden purpose. It cleared the room. It thinned the circle. It exposed who was aligned and who was attached. Separation is mercy. It feels like loss, but it is alignment. The enemy thought isolation would weaken you, but isolation strengthened you. You discovered you could survive alone. You discovered you could trust your own discernment. You discovered that silence is not emptiness. It is instruction. Stand firm in this season. Do not chase what fell away. Do not beg for old access. What left was not meant to sustain your next level. You are not lonely. You are being forged. The fire is narrowing your circle so your vision can expand. And when this refinement completes its work, you will not crave ordinary company. You will carry uncommon authority. This is only the second ignition. Third, the fire of purification. This one hurt differently. Not just opposition, not just distance, but betrayal, the kind that blindsides you, the kind that makes your chest tighten, the kind that makes you question your discernment. You trusted them, you defended them, you stood beside them, and then they turned. You felt foolish. You felt exposed. You felt the sting of misplaced loyalty. But listen carefully. This was not destruction. This was purification. Pressure does not only reveal enemies, it reveals attachments. It reveals where your loyalty exceeded wisdom. It reveals where you tied your identity to human validation. Have you ever noticed how betrayal forces clarity? Suddenly you see what you ignored. Suddenly you recognize red flags you once excused. Suddenly your spirit says, now you understand. Darkness cannot hold you, but attachment can. And so the fire burns, not to consume you, to cleanse you. Loss strips dependency on applause. Loss strips dependency on approval. Loss strips dependency on being understood. You were never meant to build your confidence on people. You were meant to anchor it in calling. This is deeper than rejection. This is identity surgery. When betrayal hits, it shakes the soul. You ask, was I naive? You ask, was I blind? No. You were growing, and growth requires pruning. Light cannot carry dead weight. Anointing cannot coexist with unhealthy dependence. So the fire intensifies. It burns illusions. It burns false expectations. It burns emotional contracts you never should have signed. And what remains you? Not the version shaped by others, not the version molded by approval, but the core, the unshakable center, the identity that does not flinch when people walk away. What survives the burn cannot be manipulated. What survives the burn cannot be intimidated. What survives the burn knows who it is. This is why the pain felt surgical, because it was precise. It targeted insecurity. It targeted fear of abandonment. It targeted your need to be affirmed, and it removed it. You are not colder now. You are clearer. You are not hardened. You are anchored. You no longer beg for loyalty. You observe it. You no longer chase validation. You embody authority. This fire makes you spiritually dangerous, because once you are free from needing approval, the enemy loses leverage. What can darkness threaten you with if you no longer fear loss? What can manipulation use against you if your identity is stable? Stand in this purification. Do not romanticize what burned away. Do not resurrect what God removed. The pain was not proof of failure. It was proof you were being refined for weight. Only the chosen endure this level of internal fire. Only the chosen survive betrayal and emerge sharper. And now you are lighter, clearer, unshakable. This is not the end of the flare. It is intensifying. Fourth, the fire of authority. This is where something shifts inside you, not around you, inside you. You felt it the moment resistance intensified, the moment they pushed harder, the moment the tone changed from disagreement to challenge. Something in you stood up. You stopped explaining. You stopped over-apologizing. You stopped shrinking to make others comfortable. Have you noticed that the more they resist you, the less you feel like bending? That is not pride. That is awakening authority. Resistance triggers rank. Darkness does not argue with what it can dominate. It only resists what carries command. And when they resisted, you leadership awakened. You felt your spine straighten. You felt your voice steady. You felt your tolerance for manipulation evaporate. That was not anger. That was alignment. You were never meant to beg for space. You were meant to take position. There is a difference. The world negotiates. The chosen declare. The world seeks approval. The chosen carry assignment. When opposition rose, something dormant broke open. You began to speak without rehearsing. You began to decide without polling opinions. You began to walk into rooms without asking if you belonged. Because you knew. You carry weight. Authority is not loud. It is settled. It does not scream. It stands. And warfare forced you to stand. If they had left you comfortable, you might have stayed passive. If they had left you unchallenged, you might have stayed small. But resistance cornered you. And in that corner, power surfaced. You realized you could endure pressure. You realized you could hold ground. You realized you did not need consensus to move forward. This is deeper than confidence. This is spiritual jurisdiction. When you stop shrinking, darkness loses territory. When you stop doubting, confusion loses influence. When you stop apologizing for existing, the atmosphere shifts. You felt it. The moment you said enough, the moment you refused to over-explain, the moment you chose silence instead of defense. That was authority activating. Opposition did not weaken you. It introduced you to yourself. You are not fragile. You are forged. You are not uncertain. You are appointed. And once authority awakens, it does not go back to sleep. This is why some people look at you differently now. They sense it. They sense the shift. You are not as accessible to manipulation. You are not as easily intimidated. You carry presence, and presence unsettles darkness. Stand firm in this. Do not retreat to who you were. Do not minimize the command you feel rising. This fire was necessary. It burned away hesitation. It burned away passivity. It revealed leadership, and this authority is only expanding. Fifth, the fire of discernment. This is where your eyes change, not your physical eyes, your spiritual sight. You began noticing patterns, small inconsistencies, shifts in tone, energy behind words. Have you felt that moment when someone smiles, but something in you tightens? That is not paranoia. That is perception. Manipulation trained you. Deception educated you. What once confused you now clarifies you. You used to second-guess your instincts. You used to override your inner warning. You used to tell yourself, I'm overthinking. Not anymore. Now you pause. Now you observe. Now you sense before you respond. Darkness tried to play games with you. It tried subtle tactics. It tried half-truths. It tried gaslighting. But every tactic sharpened you. Every attempt to mislead you strengthened your vision. You are not easily impressed anymore. You are not easily swayed. You listen beyond words. You read beyond gestures. You feel atmospheres. That is discernment. And it was activated by warfare. You begin seeing warfare before it manifests. Before the betrayal, before the sabotage, before the sudden shift. You sense it forming. That is power. The world calls it intuition. Heaven calls it discernment. And only the chosen develop it through fire. Comfort does not sharpen vision. Conflict does. You had to be misled to learn how truth feels. You had to be manipulated to understand clarity. You had to experience distortion to recognize purity. Now your spirit filters everything. You do not absorb every opinion. You do not internalize every criticism. You test it, you weigh it, you discern it. And that makes you spiritually dangerous, because darkness thrives on confusion. But you are no longer confused. You are aware. You are alert. You are watching. And here is the revelation. Discernment is not just defense, it is strategy. When you can sense motives, you move differently. When you can feel shifts, you prepare early. When you can detect false alignment, you adjust quickly. You stop reacting late, you start positioning early. That is authority evolving. That is power maturing. You are no longer walking blindly. You are navigating intentionally, and the enemy knows it. That is why subtle attacks have increased, because obvious attacks no longer work on you. But listen, even subtle warfare refines you. Even quiet resistance strengthens your perception. Stand in your awareness. Do not apologize for seeing clearly. Do not dim your discernment to keep peace. Peace built on blindness is fragile. Clarity built on truth is unshakable. You are not suspicious. You are sharpened. You are not cynical. You are calibrated. The fire has adjusted your sight. And once spiritual vision activates, it does not regress. It expands. Sixth, the fire of boldness. You remember when fear used to control your timing, when you measured your words, when you rehearsed conversations in your head, when you calculated how to say truth without upsetting anyone. That version of you is fading. Repeated conflict changed you, not in bitterness, in bravery. When they already misunderstood you, what else can they threaten when they already walked away? What else can they take when they already tried to tarnish your name? What reputation are you still protecting? Do you see it? Fear loses leverage when loss has already happened. The enemy thrives on the threat of removal, but once removal occurs and you survive it, the weapon dulls. You endured betrayal, you endured isolation, you endured exposure, and you are still standing. Stronger, clearer, less attached. This is where boldness is born, not from ego, from survival. When you realize you can lose people and not lose yourself, courage awakens. When you realize you can be opposed and still be protected, confidence stabilizes. You stop negotiating with your own voice. You stop diluting conviction. You stop shrinking insight. You speak, not recklessly, but resolutely. Have you noticed how your tone has shifted? You no longer ask permission to exist. You no longer soften truth to make darkness comfortable. You say what needs to be said, and you stand by it. That is boldness forged in fire. Darkness hates boldness, because boldness exposes it. Timidity keeps you quiet. Boldness activates territory. And once fear of loss is removed, you become spiritually dangerous. What can they threaten you with? Exclusion. You have already been separated. Reputation damage. You have already been misunderstood. Isolation. You have already survived solitude. Loss no longer intimidates you, it instructs you. This is the shift. Courage becomes your default state, not occasional bravery, default boldness. You walk into rooms without shrinking. You hold eye contact without apology. You speak truth without rehearsing approval. And the atmosphere feels it. The world moves carefully around the timid, but it recalibrates around the bold. And this boldness is not loud aggression. It is calm certainty. It is grounded authority. It is steady conviction. Stand in it. Do not retreat into smaller versions of yourself. Do not resurrect fear to maintain comfort. Comfort was never your assignment. Authority is. The fire removed hesitation. The fire burned insecurity. The fire exposed your resilience. And now you move differently because you know something. You know you cannot be easily broken. You know you cannot be easily silenced. You know you cannot be easily controlled. And when a chosen one stops fearing loss, favor accelerates. Because heaven trusts the bold. This is not the peak. It is rising. Seventh, the fire of favor. This is where it becomes undeniable. You watched doors close. You watched opportunities stall. You watched access disappear. At first it felt like loss. At first it felt like blockage. At first it felt like warfare winning. But then something unexpected happened. Another door opened. A different voice called. A new alignment formed. Have you noticed it? When one circle rejected you, another recognized you. When one platform silenced you, another amplified you. When one connection withdrew, a stronger one appeared. That is not coincidence. That is favor responding to resistance. Darkness tried to corner you. Heaven rerouted you. What they block on one level erupts on another. That is the law of divine alignment. When opposition intensifies, higher access activates. You did not chase it. You did not beg for it. It found you. That is how you know it is favor. The world promotes through politics. Heaven positions through purpose. The world closes doors out of fear. Heaven opens gates out of assignment. You thought rejection meant delay, but rejection redirected you. You thought loss meant decrease, but loss refined your trajectory. Opposition is a magnet. It draws unseen support. It pulls hidden allies into orbit. It activates divine conversations behind the scenes. While you were being resisted publicly, you were being endorsed privately. While they were questioning you, someone else was recognizing you. Favor does not always shout. Sometimes it moves quietly. But when it manifests, it shifts everything. You begin to see provision appear at precise moments. You begin to see protection intervene at critical times. You begin to see connections align without manipulation. That is not luck, that is alignment. Have you ever realized that some blessings only came after resistance? That some doors only opened once others slammed shut? That some opportunities only appeared once you stopped fighting to stay where you were not valued? That is the fire of favor. It burns away false access. It clears counterfeit doors. It removes what looked promising but lacked destiny. And then it reveals what was reserved for you. You are not just surviving opposition, you are being elevated through it. The enemy tried to contain you. Favor expanded you. The enemy tried to restrict you. Favor rerouted you. The enemy tried to isolate you. Favor introduced you to alignment. Stand still and recognize it. You are protected. You are positioned. You are backed by something greater than resistance. This is why suppression never fully works on you, because every attempt to limit you activates another layer of divine support. You carry a gravitational pull now. Not everyone can access you, but the right ones are being drawn, and this favor is intensifying. Eighth, the fire of sovereignty. This is where you stop negotiating. You feel it. A line has been drawn inside you. Not anger, not bitterness, authority. You used to explain yourself. You used to over-clarify your intentions. You used to give extra chances to people committed to misunderstanding you. Not anymore. Something shifted. You realized explanation does not convert darkness. It exposes you to it. Have you noticed how exhausting it was trying to make everyone understand your calling? Trying to justify your growth? Trying to soften your evolution so others would not feel threatened? That season is over. You are not required to shrink so others feel comfortable. You are not assigned to convince people who benefit from misinterpreting you. Light does not beg darkness to approve of its brightness. It shines, and lets exposure do the rest. This is sovereignty. You stop negotiating with what opposes your assignment. You stop entertaining conversations that drain your anointing. You stop reopening doors heaven clearly closed. Your boundaries become immovable, not defensive, decisive. There is a difference. Defensive boundaries react. Sovereign boundaries declare. You no longer answer every call. You no longer engage every accusation. You no longer respond to every subtle jab. Silence becomes strategy. Distance becomes discipline. You realize something powerful. Not everyone is permitted to walk beside you. Some were seasonal, some were situational, some were instructional. But not all are permanent. And that is not cruelty. That is clarity. Darkness negotiates. It whispers, just compromise a little. Just explain one more time. Just give them another chance. But sovereignty answers no. Because you now understand something. Access to you is privilege. Access to your time is sacred. Access to your energy is earned. You are not common. You are not public property. You are assigned. An assignment requires protection. Have you felt the peace that comes when you stop overextending yourself? When you stop chasing alignment? When you stop forcing connections? That peace is confirmation. You are no longer desperate to be understood. You are anchored in who you are. And when a chosen one becomes anchored, darkness loses negotiation power. You cannot be manipulated by guilt. You cannot be coerced by pressure. You cannot be baited by misunderstanding. You stand still, certain. Sovereignty is not isolation. It is dominion over your own space. It is knowing when to engage and when to withdraw. It is knowing that your calling does not require universal agreement. This fire is heavier because it changes how you move permanently. You are not reacting anymore. You are ruling your boundaries. And when you stop negotiating with darkness, something explosive begins to form. Ninth, the atomic fire of destiny. This is the moment everything converges. You felt the pressure building. You felt the resistance intensifying. You felt the final push. Not subtle anymore. Not quiet anymore. Direct, aggressive, strategic. Have you noticed how the warfare became bolder right before something shifted? That is not coincidence. That is timing. The greatest opposition precedes visible elevation. Darkness does not panic over what remains hidden. It panics when emergence is near. You were trained in private, refined in isolation, sharpened in betrayal, stabilized in authority. But now it surfaces. What was hidden becomes undeniable. What was doubted becomes evident. What was questioned becomes confirmed. This is not gradual anymore. This is ignition. Their final strike was meant to exhaust you, to discourage you, to intimidate you into retreat. But it did the opposite. It compressed you, and compression creates explosion. You were never being crushed, you were being charged. There is a difference. Pressure builds force, silence builds power, resistance builds momentum, and when destiny detonates, it does not ask permission, it erupts. Have you ever realized that every time they tried to extinguish you, you grew louder? Every attempt to sideline you expanded you. Every effort to minimize you refined you. That was not survival. That was preparation. This is the flare, the inevitable flare. It cannot be stopped now. You are too aware, too refined, too anchored, too aligned. Darkness cannot reverse what heaven has activated. And when they push hardest, that is the signal. Not to retreat, to rise, stand in it. Do not dim now. Do not question now. Do not hesitate now. This is the moment your private training becomes public authority. This is the moment your hidden endurance becomes visible elevation. This is the moment your story shifts from resistance to recognition. You are not emerging by accident. You are emerging by design. You are chosen. You were always chosen. The isolation was preparation. The betrayal was purification. The warfare was confirmation. The resistance was ignition. Nothing formed against you has succeeded. It only activated you. Let that settle. You are protected. You are positioned. You are unstoppable in your assignment. If this message confirms what your spirit already knew, declare it. Comment 9 below. Seal it, mark it, and stand in it. Subscribe if you are ready to walk fully in what has been activated. Because this is not the end. This is the emergence. You were never ordinary. You were never random. You were never overlooked. You were being prepared. And now the flare is visible, and nothing can extinguish what was divinely lit.